In a previous video, I made this electromagnetic sheet metal brake that doesn't really work. This time around, I'm going to make one that does work. I got a lot of comments the last time that basically said to just put more power through this. While that's not wrong, and believe me, I tried, the issue is, till you get enough amperage going through this, the wattage is so high I can't reasonably power this without doing some major electrical work in my shop. So, when all else fails, read the instructions. This is going to be the core for the new magnet. I'm basing this off of the Handyman model of the Magnabend designed by Alan Bottomley. He's the guy that invented this idea. And he was also a professor of electrical engineering, so he probably knows what he's talking about. I think this demonstrates pretty well the issue with the old one was just not enough magnet. This is going to be the core. And that's about how much wire is going to go in it. The core construction is pretty simple. It's made up of what we call in the US cold rolled steel. Rest of the British English speaking world calls bright mild steel. If you're Canadian, you're on your own. You're kind of halfway in between. But you can figure it out because you're pretty smart up there. Bottomley's design for this calls for two 19mm or 3/4 inch squares and then 4 pieces of 5/8 by 2 inch or 50 by 16 millimeter. Of course, I couldn't get 5/8, so for the middle I'm going to use a 3/4 and a half, which I'm pretty sure still adds up to the same thing. From looking at these, and also just going back to his design, I think the ratio between these and the outside pieces is important. And again, just following the instructions. So I need to machine 1/8 of an inch off of these. And so we immediately hit the paradox of the hobby machinist. This would be a lot easier if I had some of those little low-profile mill clamps that hold it in from the side, give me access to the entire top. But it's going to take me more time to make those than I would use, just moving toe clamps around on this thing. So do I do that or not? Oh, who am I kidding? That's pretty much the song of our people, isn't it? I've got this set up so it's running out 60 thousandths, which is the amount that I want to take off. These are some little dog point set screws, just flat on the bottom. So it's come to my attention that these style clamps don't actually hold the stock down. They do a really good job holding the stock. I knew they weren't going to hold the stock down, but I was thinking it's sort of the thing with a vise where you whack it a few times and it stays down, but oh no. There's inherently some float in the design on these, so even if you smack it down, it doesn't stay down. That came to my attention somewhere around here when I realized that this is much thinner than this end. On top of that problem, the belts on the mill were getting stretched out, and my face mill was stalling and blew up pretty much all of the inserts on it. So I need new inserts, I need another piece of stock, and all of that led to me getting very frustrated and doing what I should have done the first time, which is just order the right size stock on the internet. So I've included all of that, not because it makes any progress on the project, but just to demonstrate why this project has taken me so damn long. Let's go drill some holes in things. And then drilled some more holes. and tapped some of them. This is some Nomex insulation paper. Got some of this silicone insulation tubing that was salvaged from the transformers. Use that for the little lead wires here. Bottomley's instructions are to make a separate coil former and use self-bonding magnet wire. That's hard to find, so I'm just using regular magnet wire, and I'm just going to try to form the coil directly onto the core. I don't know why I can't do that, but I'm about to find out. Couple of 1/4-inch flange bolts on the ends. And then the middle gets this piece, which I just turned out of a piece of scrap. And then that drops into this bearing, and away we go. That's the first 10 pounds of wire on there. Across the middle, it's hard to keep it tight and even, but there's still plenty of room for more once you push it in there. I have a feeling this will get challenging to all get laid down and smashed in flat in the end, but let's keep going. So the calculator said I should be at about 12.5 pounds of wire. I'm at about 13. I can get it squished into the form with a clamp reasonably well, but I think going any more than that is just going to make life harder later. When I started winding this, I realized almost immediately it was going to make a lot more sense to run this other lead wire out the side. I'd say overall winding this thing went pretty quickly and pretty smoothly until I took the top of the former off and it went sprawling, and now I need to unwind and unsnarl everything. I tried to fight it back on, but it wasn't having it. Well, the good news is I didn't have to unwind it completely. I've got 3 wraps left. Ugh. Let me bring you up to speed here real quick. Rewound the whole thing, then realized I couldn't actually get it clamped in. Took that much wire off it. Checked the resistance. It's still good to go. I've got it clamped up. It's just in the mill vise, just as an extra clamp. This time I covered the inside of the former and these pieces with some packing tape. Cut some slots in here. Now I'm just going to pour some epoxy in, let that set up. The epoxy got down in there well enough. It's holding its shape, but I can tell it didn't get all the way through. I was hoping I'd see some drool out the end, but that didn't happen. My other pieces of steel came in, so I need to take one of these off to transfer the holes. This is terrifying. This is kind of terrifying because if it comes apart now, I'm pretty sure I will never get it back together. Right about here I realized that gluing the paper on glued this whole thing together, so I'll just have to transfer punch through everything. I went ahead and drilled and counterbored these, tapped that one. Those are ready to go on. Before I do that, I want to peel this Nomex paper back a little bit and take a look. So I've got some spots here where the wire is worked up over the wood. If it's just up onto this 1/4-inch plywood piece, it should be okay. If it's up onto the other piece, that's going to be above the top of the magnet. So I'm going to spend some time very carefully working this stuff loose and try and pack it back down. I have a tendency when things are going badly to not film a whole lot, but this is slowly pulling together and getting packed in there. I managed to get the top of the coil former off, which I was a little worried about, but that came off pretty easily. And now that I've gotten this far, I've realized what I should have done was just use some of these spring clamps to hold the ends down, put the sides on, then put the top back on, and then poured the epoxy in. But hindsight's 20/20. The only problem now is this is splayed out a little bit. It's not pulling in at the top. It's about 50 thousandths wider at the top than it should be. A little bit more in the middle even. I think the thing to do is pull it apart again and just cut a really shallow notch in there. Well, that's not the way I wanted this thing to come together, but that was a pretty simple solution to a problem entirely of my own creation. That looks good now. The next piece of the puzzle is the end caps. These are aluminum extrusion 2x4 with a little notch milled in for the screws. They just screw onto the ends. The idea with this design is it reduces the fraying of the magnetic field along the end. Your magnetic flux lines are just jumping from here to here. If you had the steel piece come out all the way to the end, that last little bit of magnetic field would kind of fray out along the end. But with these in place, I think we're ready to pour some more epoxy. Well, I almost ruined this once again. I've been kind of neurotically checking the resistance on here, and when I had the end caps on, it was pinching this a little bit and actually shorting a little bit to the body. It's a good thing I caught that. I did damage the insulation a little bit, but I think once I get some more Nomex paper on there and get it all potted with epoxy, should be fine. I relieved the top of the end cap a little bit, give it a little bit more clearance so it won't actually be hitting that. It's no longer shorting to the body. The resistance across the coil is right where it should be. So let's move on. I've got all the gaps blocked off with hot glue and some scrap plastic. I'm just trying to get as much epoxy down in there as I can. Pulled this thing all apart to clean up some of the epoxy that's drooled out and make sure everything is nicely aligned before I do the final pour. Also wanted to check and make sure this is all nice and firmly potted up there. So it seems like I got epoxy all the way down in there. So I'm satisfied with that. Got a couple of spots where it didn't totally clean up the epoxy and it's a little uneven because I, didn't do a very good job lining these up. I think I'll fly cut this on final assembly, but before I do that, I should got this thing all back together here. And I just want to point out how beautifully these two hinge mounting holes split around the one that holds it together there. It's almost like I planned it like that. This one, on the other hand, has two holes intersecting. Now, having two holes that intersect isn't a problem. Problem is putting bolts in. When I originally figured out the hinge mounting, I was working around the transformers in the other piece. So it's not actually symmetric, so that's why that one doesn't quite line up. But I don't think it's quite enough that I can't just and before I do the final surfacing, I want to get rid of these holes. Of course, now I need to go back and readjust the depth of the notches for the hinges. Might seem like a mistake in the order of operations, but given how much the cold roll warps when you cut the notches in it, I'm not sure that this wasn't inevitable. I also cut like a 5/1000th relief right at the edges of the hinges for the parts that pivot. One of the things I learned the last time is the drawings don't have any clearances or tolerances on them. You kind of have to figure out where you need those clearances. Now, since I had to cut a little notch in the back of this piece, I need to just deck off these hinges a little bit too. It's a little bit tight in spots, but I think that should just about wrap up the machining. Since this is pretty thin aluminum, the first iteration of the brake should be able to handle it pretty well. Of course, you just saw me disassemble this thing and use the parts on the new one, but you'll just have to forgive the continuity issues. For this last one, I need to bend this piece up. Just dug around in my stockpile and found an appropriate sized piece of steel. The ones on the end I can't get totally bent up straight, just because you can't go past 90. It wants to spring back. But this begins to show you the versatility of this system and why I think it's worth putting the effort into it. I'm going to go pop rivet these together and kind of clean this up a bit. And get some more Nomex paper down in here. Look, the rest of this is just going to kind of be a lot of the back of my hand, so let me get this done, I'll bring you back in. So kind of a quick overview of this thing. Mains power comes in, goes to an on-off switch. When that's turned on, it feeds power up to this little micro switch. When the bending beam is down, this contact is closed, which feeds power to this start button. The start button does two things. One, it passes some current through this capacitor to the bridge rectifier and to the coil to get a light clamping force. And the other thing it does is how does this work? The other thing it does is it trips the coil on this relay, which closes a contact to the bridge rectifier and also closes a contact between the micro switch and the rectifier. When you hold this down, it arms this. When you lift this up, it puts full power through the rectifier to the coil. Once this is tripped, it's also feeding power to the coil on the relay, keeping it turned on. When you put the beam back down, this capacitor basically backfeeds a little bit of current into the coil to demagnetize everything, break down the magnetic field a little quicker. Pretty slick circuit. It basically has a two-hand interlock on it. You know, reduce the chance of finger squishing. There's also a thermal switch mounted to the back of the magnet, so if it overheats, the relay won't close. One other thing that's worth pointing out, there's a varistor here. That basically works as sort of a surge protector. It spans the two AC contacts on the rectifier, protects that and the coil if there's a power surge or something. Which is probably good, because I think there might be a thunderstorm rolling in here. After months of preparation, the time is finally here. Throw the first switch! I wonder where he gets that from. Throw the second switch. Throw the third. Just go ahead and do all of them. It's bending! It's bending! Well, this project fought me like no other. So was it worth it? Absolutely. This thing is awesome. And I'll show you why next time. I was going to do this all as one video, but I think this has gone on long enough. But I got a lot of work done on the Jeep with this, so if you want to see that, stick around.